Joining me now is Hafed Al Ghwell. He is a senior fellow at the School of Advanced International Studies Foreign Policy Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Why don't we start there with what he says the real issue, the Palestinians. Do you agree?
He is correct. I mean, the reality is you can make peace with Arab regimes, but these regimes don't really represent their public. We've seen that in the past in Egypt, with Jordan, even with the Palestinians in Oslo. But that did not translate into a serious peace with the public or the people of the Arab world, who remain absolutely convinced that the only way that they will accept Israel is if the Palestinian issue is resolved.
And not everyone's celebrating this deal with the level of enthusiasm we saw at the White House. The Palestinian leadership sees this as a violation of the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which calls for Israel to withdraw from lands captured since 1967 before gaining any recognition from Arab states. Can you talk to us about that feature of this?
Well, that's absolutely correct. I mean, the Arab world has, along with the United Nations before that, recognized that the legitimate territories of the Palestinians go back to the 1967 war. That has not happened, unfortunately, or mainly because the United States has shielded Israel from any UN sanctions or any UN follow-ups on these issues. The Arabs have also adopted this. The problem is, once you had the Palestinians in Oslo accept Israel and enter into a peace with it, that gave all Arab governments a license, if you will, to do the same. The trouble, however, is that these Arab countries or governments are doing it by selling the Palestinians themselves rather than actually gaining anything for themselves. I mean, look at the Emirati, for example, peace accord. It's very clear that the Emirates did not get anything other than access to some of the military technologies of Israel and getting some good kudos here in Washington on the Hill. But its talk about suspending or canceling the annexation has been proved to be incorrect. Israeli politicians, including Netanyahu, said that they are still committed to the annexation issue. It was just a cover that the U.A.E. government wanted to sell to the Arab public, but it's not correct. Bahrain also is not very clear what does Bahrain gain from this. In fact, it is actually far more at risk than the U.A.E. A big chunk, the majority of the Bahrainis are Shiite with different alliances in Iran, who have always seen the monarchy or the ruling family as a minority who's ruling over them with the help of Saudi Arabia. So, like we've seen in Egypt or Jordan, you have a lot of fanfare, a lot of celebrations, a lot of talk in the United States, but in the Middle East or among the Arabs, this is not something that they are celebrating.
Yeah, in fact, I was reading today that the U.A.E. is actually expecting a wave of tourists from Israel, even sending a note to hotel managers to start having kosher food on hand. So is that all they get out of this, is an explosion of tourism, perhaps? I know some airlines are already discussing direct flights. What is in it for them?
It's as I told you, so far all analysts have spoken to, all including American diplomats, tell me that the reason is basically they wanted to get more mileage here in Washington. They didn't want to be held accountable by any future administration over all kinds of issues like what's happening with Saudi Arabia, for example. They didn't want to be in that same position. They wanted technologies of Israel, especially on intelligence and cyber warfare. I'm not sure even the tourism question is going to happen. I mean, Egypt had the same hopes, but then as Israeli tourists started arriving in Egypt, they were met with a public anger and outrage that made them stop coming. I mean, today you still have flights, for example, between Israel and Egypt, but I could guarantee you that you won't have more than a handful of people on the plane in each direction.
Hafed, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your analysis. Appreciate it.